Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Rochelle Ocampo, and I will be your moderator for tonight's panel called Raising an Influential Filipino Generation Meant to Disrupt. So, our goal tonight is to empower our youth, educate, and inspire, especially our new parents. So, just a little bit about myself before we begin. I am currently a co producer and lead co host of Makilala TV, which is the first and now longest running Phil and TV talk show in the New York metro area. I am also the New York State chair elect of NAFA and the creator of Raise Pinay. But my paid job, because we all have like 10 other non-paid positions and roles in the community, I am also leading development and communications at a community health center in New York. And I will end it with my most important role as of 16 months ago, being a first time mom to baby Alexander during the height of the pandemic. So, just to set everyone's expectations, for me, it is currently 10:30 p.m. at night here in New York. So I may be called to mommy duties if Alex does end up waking up. So feel free to continue the conversation while I tend to the little one. And I also expect if others had to tend to theirs at this time, feel free to do so. So let's get right to it. I would like to introduce our special panelists who hail from all parts of the US, and then we can transition into some of the questions of raising the next generation of Filipino American disruptors. So, the first guest speaker that we'd like to welcome is Dr. Joyce Javier. Dr. Javier is a general pediatrician and physician scientist whose research over the past 18 years has focused on addressing health disparities among minority immigrant population. Her most recent studies focus on the recruitment of Filipino families to decrease mental health stigma and prevent adolescent depression and suicide among Filipino youth. In 2018, she received the AAP Local Hero Award and was named one of the 100 most influential Filipino women in the world by Filipina Women's Network. Welcome, Dr. Javier. We now welcome Wilna Ray, who is a senior financial management advisor for Iraq. She was awarded CFO Award of the year 2019, a volunteer contributor to the historical documentation of Asian American in Fairfax County, Commonwealth of Virginia. Welcome, Wilna. And let's also welcome Teddy Dizon Bunag, who also, I believe, has a little one that she may have to tend to in the middle of this. So Teddy is a psychologist and founding partner at Better Steps Psychology Incorporated and psychologist at Ugat Foundation Incorporated. She studied applied social psychology and counseling psychology at Ateneo de Manila University. And lastly, I have the honor to introduce my friend, Ryan Latada, who is the CEO of Next Day Better, an immigrant owned impact agency that harnesses the power of migration for humanity. He partners with brands like MailChimp, AARP, Doctors Without Borders on storytelling campaigns, immigrant DEI, and digital transformation initiatives. He also serves as a Google Next Gen Tech Fellow and Pinterest Inclusion Insider Council member. Wow. So we have a stacked panel. I wanted to really just welcome and show my appreciation that everyone is here to join us in different time zones. And my first question is a really simple one, just so that we could get a little idea of, our background outside of our professional life. I already mentioned that I have a 16-month-old. Let's just go around the panel to see how old are your little ones, if they are still little? We'll first go with Dr. Javier.
Hi, first of all, thank you, Rachel, for the kind introduction, and thanks for inviting me to this panel. So, I have two daughters, and they are age 14 and 11.
Great.
Mhm.
And Wilna?
Oh, I think I'm the oldest the panel here speaker. I have a son who's 38 years old now, and I have a granddaughter who's 6 years old.
Oh, nice. Oh, okay. And we have Teddy.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm so excited. Mostly because I'm excited to share my experiences, handling my children. I am a family therapist, so I feel like I have had hundreds of children under my care. But officially, I am the first time mom to a 5-month-old baby daughter.
Oh, okay. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Oh my gosh, those first 5 months, I'm already having flashbacks.
She's still tiny, but not so tiny anymore.
Oh, okay. And Ryan, how old is your little one?
Yeah, my little one is named Baby Cairo. And yeah, I was talking to my wife about this, and the panel is meant to disrupt, and this kid is already disrupting our sleep. And so he's already a disruptor. And so, honestly, I also, when I spoke to Rochelle, I was like, I just have so much to learn from others because it is the most humbling experience of my entire life
Mm.
having this little kid. Yeah, and so excited to learn from all.
Yeah. Ryan, how old is Cairo?
7 months.
7 months. Okay. So Teddy got us beat by a 5-month-old.
By
So
sleep deprivation too.
yes. So now that we have a little idea of where we are all coming from, I wanted to ask each of you, what do you love about raising kids in the climate today? And also, what are the concerns that keep you up at night? Teddy, let's hear from you first because I wanted to check in with your 5-month-old. What keeps you up at night other than having to feed him?
Oh, yeah. I mean, apart from, the basics of just keeping her alive, um, mostly I am very occupied with this double-edged sword that I feel like I'm gonna have to raise my children, my daughter in. One of the things that I love the best about this generation that's up and coming is how wide a world they have access to, because of how open everything is, and there's just so much information out there and so much ways to connect with people. Like a whole universe is available to them, and that's in terms of like who they can make friends with, the cultures that they absorb, the information that they're able to absorb from the whole wide world, and all of that. I'm so excited for her because that is going to teach her so many things that we had to work so hard for, during our generation. We had to actually travel to these places in order to, like kind of get a different perspective. But for her, she's going to grow up in such a wider world than us, than we did. But at the same time, I'm so mindful of how that wide world also contains as much, a lot of negative elements as much as there are positive elements. And I am very occupied about wanting to make sure that she's equipped to handle, the just the magnitude, and all of those, like things that could possibly affect her. It's like it's literally like letting her loose in a great big world, and I want to make sure that I equip her for that, so that it doesn't overwhelm her and it doesn't
Yeah.
stimulate her in a negative way. So that's what keeps me up at night as a new parent.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much pressure knowing that there's so many resources. I was like, wait, I'm supposed to do this and this at the same time and make sure that they're still alive. Like that's a lot of pressure for us as new parents living it, in today's age. And um, Dr. Javier, you have some teens. You have two teens you mentioned. So through the pandemic, how were you able to balance that? I know that with school being school, there's like going through like remote learning and not being able to see their friends. How were you able to, like, what were your concerns and what did you like about that situation?
Yeah, thank you. I think that kind of stepping back a little to your first question, about like what do we love about raising kids? I just want to agree with Teddy first about all the resources that are out there, and also like that there's also Filipino specific resources, for Philams. I think that's very unique. Growing up, I the all I really knew about Filipino is like food and family, but then I eventually in college learned about Filipino American history and culture, and also our, the history of, discrimination against our community, but now the kids are learning those things early on.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to kind of follow up on that because in terms of concerns, mental health has obviously been a concern in my work, especially adolescent depression and suicide and just low self-esteem. So again, piggybacking on what Teddy said, I was seeing this in my own like community, but I wanted to know, was this happening among like Filipino youth across the US? And so that's what our work has been. So kind of like um, asking the community what we can do to prevent these adolescent issues. They recommended doing um, parenting programs during the school age years. And so that's what I've been doing for a decade. And so going back to what you just said, Rachel, how did you handle the pandemic? I was just really grateful to do these workshops that we've been doing in the community for the Filipino Family Health Initiative when my daughter was 3, because now I see that those skills when they were young are translating to adolescence now, where we're building this like positive relationship so that when they're older, they'll come to me when they're getting bullied during the pandemic, or, or when they're feeling left out, even though they're online, they can still feel very isolated and left out. And so it's just kind of building those blocks so that when they're teens, they'll still come to us, because growing up, it was, hard. Our families were just trying to survive and, get us through education, and there was not a lot of talking about emotions. So
Mhm.
sorry to ramble, but just wanted to kind of give some background to what I was going to say.
Yeah, of course. And Wilna, you mentioned that you had a grandchild at 6.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I raised my son by myself when he was 3 years old because we were in
Mm.
the foreign service. So we were assigned in Korea for 4 years. He was born in Korea. My husband was the political military officer of the U.S. Department of State. And so when we came back here in U.S., my husband died. So I raised my son by myself at 3.5 years old. And luckily, yeah, he's now married, happily married, and now I have this granddaughter. So I feel like I'm starting again. But of course, I just get her once a month, just on a weekend. And yeah, talking about raising the kid. Yeah, I look at you guys, and you all look like my children. You're very young, as far as I'm concerned. And it's raising my son by myself is not really hard, in a way that I was able to get my Korean maid to join me. I have families all over here in the Virginia, Maryland, DC area, and I have my grandparents also in Baltimore. So it's the great family support of being a Filipino here. And Filipino communities here in the Washington DC area are also very close.
Mhm.
uh, Talking about raising a kid and how we raised a kid at those years, 1980s and 90s, is still easy. We don't have the pandemic, but
No cell
yeah,
phone.
it's it's a very healthy environment, I should say. My son can adjust to any kind of people, you name it. And unfortunately, he doesn't speak Filipino. I'm teaching him Filipino, but he speaks fluent French and Korean. So I don't want him to mix up all the languages that he's learning. But I'm teaching my granddaughter Filipino.
Oh,
So
great.
yes,
Wow.
he speaks Filipino with no accent. I'm telling you. And I always teach her the paw. Everything is with the paw and with the polite, with the right, culture as much as possible. And my son would say, Mom, you're talking to her, and I don't know what she's talking about. I don't know what you two are talking about. Well,
Oh,
I said, you need to learn from your daughter now.
yeah, yeah.
And it's not, it's harder now, the way I look at it. Like, I feel bad for my granddaughter when this pandemic started, that we cannot even bring her to a playground.
I
So what my son did was he created her own playground in his backyard. They have a separate house, they have a big backyard, and I'm really happy for that. But at the same time, it's just pitiful. It breaks my heart to ask them to, hey, wear your mask, those kind of thing. It's good that we have now vaccination from that age 5 to 11. So
Mhm.
thank you. And
Yeah.
hopefully we can get over this and let them enjoy, the life as a kid. I guess that's how I feel with kids right now. But looking at my son, it's a very normal, raising the kid. I didn't realize that he's already grown up. So it's elementary school, high school, college, and all of a sudden, yeah, he said he's going to propose, to this girl who happened to be a daughter of somebody from the State Department also. So we are real estate department, family. And so I was asking him, do you know what you're doing? Do you know what getting married is? Do you know what being a child is? And yeah, he just said it, Mom, I've grown. So
Oh,
yes, it's growing from what do you call this? Growing on a mixed culture. It's not hard for him. He understands some bad words in Filipinos because he said, just in case some Filipinos would throw him some bad words, at least he knows. And he joined the Filipino American Society when he was in college. And then after maybe 2 days, they said, Mom, they don't want to talk to me. I said, I'm sorry, hon, you're not a Filipino.
oh no. It
Don't eat
seems
the
so
language.
isolating.
I said, you don't eat the language, you don't speak the language. I said, you don't eat the food. I said, you don't know the common jokes. And I'm sorry, sort of like, but I don't want to occupy, the whole time, but
Yeah.
it's
No,
a,
it's good to hear that different perspective as
yeah,
not just like a single mom, but also somebody who, as a grandparent too,
yes,
seeing view of not being able to even simply play in a playground
yeah,
during the
yeah.
pandemic.
But
Um, and
my son joined a bike group now that he's grown up, and you wouldn't believe him. You wouldn't believe it. He met one of our townmates, and he identified himself as a Filipino. He identified himself from the province where they came from. And so they became friends. So they're bike team members, at both of them. And this guy happened to be a physicist, also a Filipino who's working at the Pentagon. And I
mm,
said, "Oh, it's really interesting." So I can share with you some other experiences of raising, what do you call this, a child, and as they grow up, raising on two different cultures that does not really class, you
yeah,
know.
I mean, we'll definitely go through the different questions, and then your
Sure.
experiences can be shared too. Thank you, Wilma.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I'll stop for now, and yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I wanted to also touch base with Ryan. With a 7 month old, what do you enjoy about raising Cairo in climate today? Which is a really actually weird question to ask. Like thinking positively in the light of pandemic, raising a child. What are the positives of it for you?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks. And it's so inspiring just to hear everyone else's story as well. For me, I think about what's most exciting is about exploring possibilities with my kid and seeing who are you going to grow up to be. My ask of him is like, I just want you to be kind and compassionate. And right now, for example, I'm wearing a SpaceX shirt, and he has a SpaceX shirt, and I wonder, are you going to be an astronaut or are you going to be a ballet dancer? And so we actually live maybe 10 minutes away from Princeton University. And we were taking a stroll in Princeton University. And I said to myself, like, whoa, is this your first college tour? And this is this is your fourth month on this earth. And so I'm just really excited about the possibilities and opportunities that are being opened up to him. And that's so exciting, something that I never particularly had kind of growing up. I think for me, in terms of what keeps me awake at night, I mean, there's so many things. It's very anxiety inducing having a child. Oh my goodness. And so, I could say things about like climate change or racism or generational wealth. But for me, I think about healing. That's like my main priority because I'm in the process of healing. I am. I feel like I have, trauma in my life, and I just don't want to project that to the next generation. I'm doing this study on racial trauma on epigenetics, and we see how trauma is passed down in our genes. So trauma from Spanish colonialism, trauma from mass immigration of Filipinos into the United States, trauma from what's happening with COVID. And I want to make sure that I help end that generational trauma and move towards generational healing. And so that's kind of like been my thrust, and what my partner and I have been really thinking about is how do we heal.
Yeah, I feel like that's such an important aspect that we kind of take for granted, like that it doesn't affect us. It's not something that we physically can see or feel like that it's hurting us currently, but it may affect us and future generations if we keep letting it
And
fester inside us and letting it come out.
right. And the effects of racial trauma or trauma, for example, we were left behind as children. As my parents moved to the United States, they left us for 5 years, right? There was this loneliness in the absence. And in fact, trauma in the genes shows that it affects aging, longevity, a dignified life, and studies show this. And so, how do we kind of like really address that from a scientific level as well? And so, very interesting. I'll be more than happy to share the study with folks as well.
Yeah, no, I feel free if you have time to put it into the chat for everyone, just so we can read more about it. I'm actually really curious. I didn't even realize that you were working into that field, Ryan. So yeah, that's incredible. So I feel like that we were able to get a little bit more inside look of our different perspectives of our kids. My next question for everyone is: do we think that Filipino values are getting lost, or are they changing? I know that we touched upon it a little bit earlier, but what do you feel about the Filipino values? Like, for example, I think it was Wilna, you mentioned like you made sure that your grandchild or granddaughter always made sure that they said po at the end of everything. So and anyone could start for this question of, if you think that Filipino values are getting lost or are they changing?
I can go first. I think that they're not getting lost. I think they're still present. I feel like there's like a reawakening that's happening. The two values that I'm thinking about are kapwa, just seeing this amazing event that PhilPro has spearheaded, and I've worked with PhilPro in the past. It's amazing how the Filipino community has mobilized during this pandemic to make sure we aren't left behind. And then the spirit of bayanihan, for the community. What I find in my own research that kind of addresses what Ryan was talking about. How do we heal that generational trauma? What I find is that the Filipino families who do our workshops, they're doing it because they want to help themselves, but also kind of to make sure that these programs are available. They're participating in research studies. So I do see healing happening. And I see hope because we have these resources available. And I think a lot of the cultural values that we have, some may have like negative connotation, but there's always a positive light to it. And I think for me growing up, at first I was confused why, our parents raised us very authoritative. But now looking back, I understand it was all with the right intention, but some of the youth now may not get it until they get older. So trying to kind of bridge that gap early so there's not that misunderstanding.
If I can just, it's my turn to piggyback off of what Dr. Joyce is saying now, and I'm really just focusing on what she's saying about how we were raised versus how we're trying to raise our children in this day and age, and it's true that there's a lot of parenting decisions that were made by our parents that you only really just understand once you become a parent yourself. But at the same time, as a psychologist, as a clinician who studies our culture in that way and how it affects families and the upbringing of families, my mind goes back to what we were talking about just like our kids being able to access such a wide array of possibilities, such a wide array of information and opinions and insights and realities that are out there and perspectives. And I feel like when you're talking about our culture, if it's being preserved, I feel like definitely, but I feel like it's evolving, and it's evolving, and I feel like if we want to preserve the best of our culture, our parenting style has to evolve as well, so that we don't just absorb, the things that we learned from the past generation. Well intentioned though they were, I feel like in Psikolohiyang Filipino studies, you'll see that the Filipino parenting actually has a lot of unconscious and inadvertent authoritarianism, where we're encouraged to not talk back, or we're encouraged to just obey and kind of like not speak up and or not talk about your feelings. And so like a lot of Filipinos actually, like a very big chunk of the population were just told what to think instead of really how to think, or think through critical situations that arise, how to process a bulk of information. And a lot of Filipinos were also just told kind of like not to talk about certain things, like me, for example, I'm Kapampangan. My whole family is from Pampanga, and we in our culture, they say don't talk about money. It's very tacky, like don't talk about like if the affairs of other families and stuff like that. And the thing is, those are such huge realities that are that we deal with, and so I find it so difficult now looking back how we were told not to talk about certain things when in fact we should have been taught how to talk about the difficult things. And I
Yeah.
think that is partly what is worrying me about, or not necessarily what's worrying me, but what's keeping me up at night about making sure that I'm doing better for my child, because I want to teach her to be able to equip herself for the wide world that's out there. And I think that means that I have to teach her how to think through things, how to do critical thinking, and how to talk to me and to others about difficult things, like the way there's such a huge political divide. I feel
Yeah.
like it right, like if we were just equipped to be able to talk about it in a decent way, in a dignified way, in an eloquent and articulate way, like there wouldn't be so much trolling out in the world, and I feel like if we are to preserve the best of the Filipino culture in this next generation, we have to be mindful first of the unconscious negative parts of the Filipino culture, so that we're more active about not passing it down to the generations that come after us.
Yeah, oh my gosh, Teddy, I feel like that you hit on so many points that I want to follow up on, like 30 different things that you just said. I was like, yes, I could relate. Oh my gosh, my parents said this and that. I was like, oh, how did you know? So yeah, I feel like that I can relate on so many of those things on so many levels. So yeah, I definitely want to, I feel like I should set up like a one-to-one Zoom with you just to talk about
Let's do it.
And what about Wilna? Wilna, tell us about, from your point of view of Filipino values.
Filipino values are still there. And I think it's up to us parents or grandparents to teach them to our kids. One thing I'm doing with my son is I'm showing him the good values of the Filipinos. I'm also showing him the bad values that I know, but showing him the difference. And what's the difference between the American values and the Filipino values? But I make sure that he keeps the good Filipino values. I think that's the very important thing that we need to do because they're on this world or in this country where there are different values. I mean, it's not only the American values, it's not only the Filipino values. There's the Arab values. There's now, with the so many groups that we have now in this country. But I would say it's not eroding. I've seen a lot of Filipino families here in my area, and they still maintain the Filipino values, the respect. We call it bayanihan, but it's really like a teamwork that they bring also in their office, in their family, the compassion, the God fearing on how they actually pray and value, the teachings that we learn from our parents and grandparents. uh some Filipinos here, one thing I've noticed is that they're so confused because once they come here to America, whether they're first generation or second generation, they think that they should forget the Filipino values, habits, and whatever. And sometimes some Filipinos even have twisted tongues that they cannot speak the Filipino language or whatever native language they have when they came here. I think we should not lose that. As a matter of fact, I'm attending a Bible study here with a group of Filipinos who speaks Tagalog. And mind you, it's sort of like the Tagalog and the Filipino words are still there. They teach their children even how to read and write and speak Filipino. And I think
Wow.
it's our job to do that. I'm really amazed and really, admire those families, who do that. We have a Catholic school here that they have a special program and they teach Filipinos children, not only the prayer in Filipino, but the dances, the songs, and everything else. And I think it's our duty, to keep these values intact so that they can understand that, yes, we are here in a huge country where there are very many, many values, many, many cultures. But if we keep them and teach our children and grandchildren that these are the good Filipino values, and so they can also pass this on to their kids. I mean, my son, even though he doesn't speak the language, but in his ways and habits and dealing with people, he's a practicing Filipino, I should
Yes,
say. It's yeah, and I tell you, he's introducing himself as somebody who came from a province in the Philippines
of
when
course.
he's,
Yeah.
yeah, he's just
Proud
been
of
in
it.
the Philippines maybe 3 times, but
That's fine.
it's
He
good.
checks out, and one box is fine enough. It's good
Yes, that's true. That's true.
enough.
So I think, it's something that we should remember as parents and grandparents. We can pass it on where whatever country we are and whatever culture we are exposed to. It's just a matter of teaching them, okay, this is it, so that they have a choice on which values they should follow and, keep them in their lives.
Yeah.
Over. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilna. And Ryan, what do you think about Filipino values? Do you think that they're slowly being eradicated, or are they just changing?
Yeah, I think it's one thing to say you have values. It's another thing to say it's how we live our values. So I think about changing mindsets and behaviors. And so for me, I think about what are the mindsets or behaviors that I want to unlearn so my son will not pick up these habits or behaviors. So one thing is like scarcity mindset. I remember my mom wanting me to be a nurse because it was the safe thing to do, and you have this financial security. And there was this language around, around here's a secure future. But if you kind of beat that sense of use fear-driven language, then how do we encourage our communities or the next generation to be entrepreneurs or innovators or disrupt in whatever field in a way, despite it being scary, right? And I'm like, Mom, I'm scared of blood. How am I going to be? How am I going to be a nurse if I'm scared of blood? And so that's like one particular thing. I spoke to we're doing a story on the former CTO of New York City, and she's Filipina, actually, Minerva
Mhm.
Tantoko, and she said to me, Ryan, I make it a point to say that in all my talks that I am a Filipino immigrant that have 4 U.S. patents. And she was like, I was like, huh, yeah. Well, if my mom would tell me not to do that because that would mean I'm being too boastful. And then she would say, Minerva said, no, we need more possibility models out there to show what is possible to the next generation. That's why I make it a point. And so, what are some of like these behaviors or mindsets that I want to unlearn so that my kid doesn't learn it from me? So that's how I think about values in that way.
So deep.
I
I so deep. I feel like that I'm now thinking of how to humble brag all the time now.
Rachel, can I add to what Ryan is
Of
just
course.
saying right now? It's just it struck a chord in me just because like I feel like if we're talking about if we're in that vein of just like how to promote good Filipino values once we've identified, like what good values we do want to pass on. I feel like especially um with us, with our kids now having to deal with, dual identities, by being in two different cultures. I feel like a lot of it is pronouncing it into like actually speaking it out when it's happening. Like for example, like every Christmas my family does like a charity work, like we do outreaches, like we do soup kitchens and stuff like that. And sometimes, I have nieces and nephews who'll ask, like, why do we do this? And, such a good opportunity for you to say, this is pakikipagkapwa, like, or like when you're in a, when they're, playing ball, somewhere like at a YMCA or whatever. And you're like, yeah, share your ball with other kids. And they ask, like, why would I do that? And you have a chance to speak it in the native term that we have, because that is pakikisama, or so like let's be mindful about making sure we're labeling it in the value that we know it as, so that our kids can also pass it down for what it is.
Definitely. Yeah, I feel like that everything is so loaded in all of your responses. I feel like that I'm learning so much in terms of not just labeling the different Filipino values, but figuring out like how to unlearn them, figuring out which ones to teach your kids, figuring out which one's the difference between good and bad values. Because for me, Filipino values are just like, it's just being Filipino. We're good and bad. Like it just comes with the package. So so good to hear and relate to each of your stories. I feel that this would be a good time to also check in about the different generations of raising Filipinos within our family. So talking about how involved our lolas and lolos are, how involved are the titos and titas in our lives, raising the next generation, raising our kids. How involved are they? Who wants to start? How involved are your lolas and lolos for your kids?
If I may start, I was surprised when my granddaughter was born, because my granddaughter is just maybe 1/8 Filipino. Because I married an American, my son married also an American, and the rest are actually, But when my granddaughter was born, my son tells, no, you will talk to Lola. So she's calling me Lola.
Of course.
So it's really up to us to really share, that good value. It's now she knows that, these are the kind of things that, I do, as coming from a different culture, but it doesn't clash really with the other values and the cultures that they have. It's the kid is not confused on what is this, what is Lola. And so explain that Lola is a grandmother. She calls the other Lola Nina. She calls
Mhm.
the other people like my sisters. She calls them Tita also. So she knows the Tita, she knows the Lolo, she knows the Lola, and I think we should just like what you've said, just explain to them the difference and then accept the fact who they are. Because yeah, I sort of like even did a what do you call this, a generation whatever, because I myself is a mixture of everything. Like I'm a mixture of European, Filipino, Chinese, as a Filipino, just because I was born in the Philippines. And I think most of us are in that kind of situation. There is no one homogeneous Filipino. We are all mixed of all cultures. And I think it's important to explain that to our children, what
Mhm.
they are, what are their genetics, but at the same time, the culture that we have to follow. Like most of our culture, maybe Spanish, some of our culture, maybe something different. So it is just telling them the truth, the fact, and the values, because they may learn other values. My granddaughter may marry somebody else from a different country. You'll never know, and they need to be prepared for that. They should grow up not confused on where they came from, who they are, and their own personality.
Well, I'm just curious. Does your 6-year-old granddaughter, does she do like the mano po to you?
Yes, she does.
He does.
She does.
Oh,
She does. I taught her, and my son also. I also taught my son that, so she knows. She knows. I did. Yeah.
well, okay. And how about the others? How involved are your parents, your grandparents in your lives? And how has that really affected in terms of raising your own child?
Uh, my since my husband, passed when my kid was still very young, my parents came here and they actually stayed maybe till my son is almost on the grade school. So
Okay.
she knows. So my father is here, my mother is here. And so when we went back to the Philippines, when my father and my mother are getting sick, so he knows. He knows the values. And we have the Simbang Gabi sponsor in the Philippines. When I brought him, he was 20 years old. And all of a sudden, I saw him kissing hands of all the older people,
Oh,
in my small town. So I said, how did you know how to do that? Well, I see the other kids doing it, so I think I should also
wow.
be doing it. So he adopts the culture as much as he can. He adopts the culture as much as he can. It's sort of like he adopts it when he knows it's the right place to adopt it, kind of thing. He's
Mm,
a very American when he's with Americans. He's very Filipino when he's with Filipinos. And like simple thing, like if there's a handyman working in his house, he makes sure that he feeds them for lunch. I mean,
mm,
sometimes here the workers come to your house and
mhm.
they work beyond lunchtime, and
Yeah.
some people don't feed them. No, I taught him that if there's somebody in your house, the first thing you need to offer is offer him food, and
Yes.
especially if they're workers in your house. And so he does that. He does that, and so it's not lost. I should say
Yeah.
it's not lost. It's up to us to teach them. And it's a good practice really. Maybe other nationalities can can learn from us.
Yeah, yeah. And I actually, before I forget, I wanted to check in with Dr. Javier. I know that you do a lot of studies with Filipino families. I'm actually really curious if you've seen, what is the impact of Lolos and Lolas raising, helping raise their grandchild.
Yes, absolutely essential. I think I need to share for myself. My parents both worked full time, and so my Lolo and Lola came to help raise me and my sisters. Um, Lola showed her love by, through our stomachs, asking always if we ate yet.
Yes,
Um, she taught us the value of respecting your elders, family, education, and I was very blessed to have her meet my children, her great grandchildren, and oh, sorry, just get a little emotional. So she lived to the age of 92. I think her secret was drinking Coca-Cola every day. But I still remember that morning when she passed away. I wanted to tell her, "Lola, I love you so much. Thank you for everything you did for me and my family, and I'm sorry if I couldn't take you to all your doctor's appointments. I was a working mom and I couldn't do all of that." But, those words, like, didn't come out, and looking back, we're not very verbal growing up, and, um but in the end, what I did ask her is like, "Are you proud of me, Lola?" And she said, "Yes, Joyce." And I said, "Why are you proud, Lola?" And she's like, "Because you love me." And I was like, "Oh, it's not because 'cause I'm a doctor, thank God." Like, that meant the world
Oh
to
my
me,
God.
because it meant the world to me, because it was love, and she always made me feel important. She gave me that gift of time, right? The gift of time. And so now, as a mom, trying to have my mom spend that time that I just had the gift of my Lola, just wanting to pass that. And I have, 3 titas who are like my 3 additional moms. Mother's Days, it's very expensive to give Mother's Day presents to all that titas. So, like, it's so important, and I think so critical, and let's not wait till we're on our deathbeds to say we're
Mm.
proud of our kids. Like what Teddy was saying, yes, we take the good, um, and we do things different because we're living in a different generation. But our kids don't want us to be perfect; they just want to know that we're proud of them. And that's what I'm learning in these workshops, is how to take the strengths of our community, but also do things a different way. And that's just the beauty of what I see in these workshops. So
That
yeah.
is so powerful. I am now, tomorrow, I'm going to tell my 16-month-old, I am proud of you. I'm going to make it a point that he knows that I'm proud of him, that he made a poo poo. Like, for any little milestone achievement, I am proud of you, Alex.
I
Yes.
do that. I do that, Rachel.
It
Like,
is good to talk to your babies as much as possible, because that's where they're soaking
uh-huh.
it in already. It's their
Yeah.
development. It's good.
Like
Yeah.
sometimes my baby will hold my hand real tight, and then she'll do like a big fart, and I'll be like, "Good job." I mean, like I talk to her primarily, like my rule of thumb, my guiding light for how I talk to my daughter is how my mother would talk to her, or like how my own mother talked to me. Unfortunately, my mother has passed away, but I named my daughter after her. And so I mean, like, we're Filipino. You would have to um like wild horse, wild hordes couldn't like make them stay away, like if you're talking about the role of grandparents and parents, I mean, like, grandparents and like titos and titas, and how we're raising our kids now, like, oh my gosh, like, you'd have to actually like fight them off so that they weren't present. But speaking as a family psychologist, I have to be the one to caution against over involvement, just because when there are too many cooks in the kitchen, it can also still kind of confuse the child, especially when you're a new generation trying to cherry pick for yourself which of the Filipino values you really want to highlight and which one you want to de-emphasize. You have to make sure that praise, punishment, discipline, all of that is aligned, from like how you do it. Making sure that when they're at their Lola's house, that they're not suddenly overindulged, and they're not suddenly like, that the messaging is aligned from you to them, like whoever is helping you to raise your kids, which is the traditional Filipino way. There's really a lot of family support that's available. You just want to make sure you're communicating to these people that what your goals are for your child, and kind of sometimes to tell them why you're preferring a certain kind of approach, because they did it their way and it worked. For them, they'll say, "Oh, we did this during our time and you turned out okay."
Oh my God. Every day, Teddy. Every day
Yeah.
I hear that.
So
Oh,
they'll say that, and sometimes you have to do a better job of just like putting in the effort to kind of communicate why you're trying out a new approach, and for to ask for their indulgence, to just kind of say, "Ma, I'm the mom. Let's just try it out, okay?"
yes, yes. And Ryan, what about you? In terms of your involvement of your grandparents and your parents to Cairo?
Yeah, by the way, I'm writing a lot of notes. See, I told you, you guys are I'm learning so much from all. Like, yes, Teddy, I'm also proud of my son's farts and poops, and it's never knew I would be like that. Dr. Joyce, and I mean, you almost made me kind of like tear up because I think about trauma, and trauma takes root in absence of love.
Mhm.
And I think what I've learned so much, especially from the big family of my partner, she's Filipino as well, is that the aunties and uncles, there is a line of family members that just want to hold our kid and show love. And they are not shy about saying, I love you. And that is so powerful. And I think about my experience because they're second, really second generation Filipinos here. They came here in like the 60s and such. And like for me, my like a lot of Filipino stories, our immigration story is a story of family separation. It's a family separated by years and distance, and it's a family that have learned because of an attempt to be resilient, to in many ways not to say I love you.
Mm.
And how do we unlearn that and unify and bring our families back together, especially the ones that are separated? And so I'm so lucky to be in my particular wife's family. Not saying that I'm not lucky with my own family, because they are together and you could just feel it. All our families like all over the world. And so yeah, full of love. And Dr. Joyce, thanks for sharing that story. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I personally feel so fortunate to have such a strong support system, whether it be my parents, my husband's parents, like they absolutely adore Alex, but also our grandparents, our titas, our titos, my sister, my brother, like everyone is just will like drive over here if there was a moment that I needed to myself, like they will come over and help out. I really feel like that we're so lucky to be in that situation. So for my next question, I wanted to check in. Like, do you have a story from your family where you're like, I wish my mom and dad raised me this way that you are now going to adopt for your child? Do you have like a story that you feel like that, oh my gosh, this is how I want it to happen? Teddy, did you want to start? I know you're nodding.
Oh,
Did you have like a
sorry,
testimony?
just like a full montage of like 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 events in my life. I mean, I'm fortunate enough that my parents were both very communicative. They weren't communicative about emotions, as not a lot of Filipino families were. I think that's something that we're really only starting to learn now about how to really talk about emotions. But I'm grateful that they were communicative about other things. My dad is a lawyer, and he would always tell me, um, like if I say like, Dad, can you buy me this? He'll say, make an argument for it. Like I had to litigate for my own toys, y'all. But I mean, and that just like that went on throughout my whole life. Like, Dad, I need, like this amount of money to pay for prom, and then he'll be like, make an argument for it.
Wow.
So I had to argue for prom. But what it did, and then but what it did for me was it allowed me to think critically about, and how to like elevate my argument instead of, throw a tantrum or whine about, things that I'm not getting. Like, I'll process in my own head if this was worth having in the first place, or if I really, really, really wanted it, or it's just like a whim or whatever. And I feel like that communicativeness has allowed me to articulate for myself the things that I've needed in my adult life, like fighting to be in relationships that were healthy, and fighting to be in friendships that were supportive, and fighting to be in positions of power where, traditionally a Filipino woman wouldn't necessarily fit, like it's that assertiveness, that communicativeness, that eloquence, like has allowed me to communicate to the world that, I want a place in it. So I was really very grateful for that, and I want that for my daughter too. My mom was a my mom is also a straight talker,
Mm.
and she basically was just so direct with me that it made me think that, okay, why do I have to, like, go round and round if I could just, like, get
What's the
straight to
point?
my point. And I feel like going round and round, asking for something in a roundabout way is a very Filipino thing, because you kind of don't want to, like, you don't want to brag, or you don't want to impose, you don't want to be a burden, you don't want to be a hassle. So but my mom, she'll she so one time she the story that comes to mind is when she finally decided to sit me down for my birds and bees talk, for the birds and the bees talk.
Oh,
And she's a doctor, so instead of going, oh, the birds and the bees, this is what happens, she said, she put up her anatomy book, and she goes, Anak, this is a thing, this is the boys thing, this is the female thing that goes together. Like, and I just and I think I was 11 at that point, and like I didn't understand it at the time. But I think what it did was it made me think that I could talk about weird
mm.
things that other people didn't think, were good to talk about.
Yeah.
So at least with my mom, I knew I could talk to her. So everything that happened from then on about, just like all your experiences as a teenager, a lot of them are awkward and strange and weird. To be able to know that I could go to her and just like do it like a straight shot of just like, "Ma, this happened today," like, was such a gift, and I want to pass that on.
Wow, you are so lucky. I feel that I am taking so many notes from how to raise this boy over here. But yeah, no, I truly appreciate all these little trinkets that I want to hopefully pass down, not just from what I've learned from my parents, but also from you, Teddy. Again, we're gonna do a
For
one to
everyone.
one. No, that's really honestly, that's really valuable lessons. And to just think about, if someone were to ask me to, fight for, ice cream for dessert, and like ask why, I was like, well, because I want to. It's like, no, that's not enough. So I feel like it really does raise your critical thinking and reasoning. So I am gonna also add that to my arsenal.
Repertoire, yeah.
Yes, yes. And we'll know. What about you? What in terms of our question of if you wish that you had your mom and dad raise you this way, did you have a story about how you adopted for your child?
No, not really. As a matter of fact, my mom and dad has been very straight in talking to us, which actually helped me a lot in being a single parent,
Hmm.
because raising a boy as he's getting to be a teenager, especially getting to the stage of having a girlfriend or whatever. I can talk to him like I'm his dad. So he was actually surprised that when we were talking about it as he was on his adolescent days, after we talked, he said, Mom, I don't believe it. I said, What? I said, I don't believe I'm talking to you like this. And I
Oh,
said,
wow.
and I said, Sweetheart, I said, I'm your mom and I'm your dad, and you can talk to me about anything. And
Wow.
so even up to this time, now that he's married and he has children, yes, that's still the communication that we have. So I would suggest that even now that your kids are months old, grow up with them as you talk with them. Communication as they get older. Like, for instance, when my son was, I don't know, maybe 30s, and there are some guys who would like to date me for whatever reason, because I'm a widow for 34 years. I never remarried. And so he would ask me like, Mom, who's that guy? And so the role has been reversed, as if like
Wow.
he's my father. And even up to this time, he's still very protective. Like, I have my own house. He has his own house. Like, when he was getting married, I said, sweetheart, what are you going to do with your bride? Are you going to take him home here and I will fix the house? I said, Mom, no, I'm going to buy my own house. And he bought his own house. But at the same time, that respect is there, but the communication is there. So I'm so thankful that my parents raised me that way. And I also raised him that way.
Mhm.
And so we're doing it. He's doing the same thing with my granddaughter, and
That's
that's what I told him. Like at first, when the baby was young and he doesn't want to listen, I said, look, your child is not a dog. He's a human being. Dog, you say, go sit, go sleep, or whatever. I said, this is a human being and you need to talk to him. And so at the onset, now that you guys are still having these young kids, talking, and communicating is the most important thing. Go grow up with them as they grow older,
Mhm.
because there was a time that my son is growing like a little boy, but as he's growing older and older, then I started talking to him like an adult. So right now, that's the key. Talking, communication, at all levels is very important.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that is a trend in general throughout this panel is really communication and how important it is for us to communicate in certain ways
Mhm.
to our kids.
Yeah.
So Dr. Javier, what about you? Do you have a story or tidbits of how you want to raise your kids um, from your parents?
Yeah. Yeah, so, I love my mom and dad so much, but at the same time, we couldn't really, really talk to each other, especially when I was a teenager, and I think, um, because of that, and then studying a lot of what I study about, like, kids feeling isolated and alone, I was very, very, like, worried about that, and so, I definitely agree with Teddy and Wilna, and I hope that this will happen with my teens, where they will come to me, and so far they are coming to me with
Mm.
what's going on in their lives, which I'm very grateful for, but it wasn't easy, and I think the workshops that we talk about, um, have a lot to do with communication skills, and not just only communication skills with your children, but with your spouse, the co-parent that you have, and kind of thinking about that trauma that has passed on that we're trying to undo. And so, like Wilna is saying, learn with your kids, grow with them. I definitely feel like that's what's happening. Where I'm learning how to listen and without judgment, and validate feelings and normalize the feelings. When growing up, we weren't always encouraged to share feelings. So, again, I think the program that we are doing, I learned so much from all the parents in the workshop. So I feel really blessed every time we have that. So um, I'll just end with like, I'll try to put it in the chat, but according to research, there's like 7 things that you can do with your children called positive childhood experiences.
Mm.
And if you can do that with your kids, then when they grow up to be adults, they'll have healthy relationships as adults, and they'll be less likely to have like depression. And um, I mean, one of them is, having someone you can talk to about your feelings with, feeling like someone stood by you growing up, being proud of your cultural traditions,
Mm.
having belonging in high school, having friends, having 2 other non-parent adults who care about you. So there's a lot of things that we know now from research, and what we can do is try to promote those things with our kids. So
I
yeah.
love that. Dr. Javier, I'm gonna be looking out for that in the chat. I
Okay, I have to find it
definitely
now.
yes, please share it. I'm really interested in learning that and learning from other parents, because what you're doing is really just consolidating all this knowledge of all these families and parents and putting it into data. And data is so powerful for us to share, to really show concrete examples. Like, this is not just me experiencing this, I can learn from other parents, dozens and hundreds of other parents who are going through the same thing. I feel like that's so powerful. So yes, feel free to share those top things for us in the chat. And Ryan, I know that you lost connection for a little bit, but for you, do you have a story of how you wish your mom and dad raised you this way, that you're going to adopt for Cairo?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, there's so many. No, yeah, it's more like I think as now that I'm a dad, like a new dad, right? I just realized that raising my son is like a practice of raising myself. And I've never just been so reflective about my own parents' parenting and my
Mm-hmm.
relationship with them and how I value it even more and how I have a deeper understanding what they did, I think one thing for me is that when we first immigrated here in 1994, we immigrated to and there were a lot of families there, a lot of men that were there without their families, and we would gather, and the men would gather. And looking back at it now, I understand the amount of toxic masculinity in those gatherings and how much I absorb from just being there as a kid. And so it's not necessarily how I would ask them to raise me differently or how I would raise Cairo differently. It's like really affording tools and resources for us Filipino men to learn how to be great fathers, and to be surrounded by great men that we could look up to, and that essentially just be the role models that we need in our community. Far too often I hear of stories of Filipino men cheating. Like, I want to start a movement of Filipino men don't cheat.
Stop it. Oh
Uh,
my God.
yeah, and it's and
Oh.
yeah, I want to see a Filipino father be the Oprah and talk about what it means to be a father in our community. And so um, I wish my parents or my father specifically, who went through pain, who went through the Gulf War and like saw someone shot dead during the Gulf War in Kuwait, where I was born, have this resource to other men, um, that would help each other grow and heal, right? And so that's what I have today. Actually, I have a group of men. I actually have a dad support group of maybe 8 new COVID dads. We're just talking about, oh my gosh, is that rash? Is that a thing? Like, so that's I'm happy to say that I have that, and I hope other Filipino new fathers have that too.
That is awesome. Well, I actually wanted to piggyback on top of what you just said, Ryan, and ask you like the next question of, what do you say to future parents now that you are a veteran of a 7-month old? Like, what do you say to future parents, now that you have a little taste of fatherhood? How
Oh my
can
god,
how can future fathers best prepare?
I don't know. Okay, honestly, so I'm like my partner is right next to me. Like, I'm pretty sure she's laughing at me. Like, we don't know what we're doing. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I have this book from Harvard Business School on parenting. It's this thick, like 500 pages. I don't have time to read. No, I guess like what I'm gonna say, it's going to be all right, and there's just so much to learn, and that's part of the learning process. And just yeah, it's I have so many questions, but I know that I'm surrounded with love. I know that my son will have the opportunities that I'll never have, and I'm just living life in abundance and gratitude, and I just hope that my kid feels just love. And so that's that is maybe the one thing that I could share with parents is just you will never, I don't know, I don't want to project, but I have never known this type of love that I feel today as it when my kid was born. Holy cow, right? And so it's amazing.
Rachel, if I may share what I
Yes.
did, what I did with my son, because I see my son as a really good father and a good husband. And as he was growing up, I keep on telling him how good a father his father is, how good a husband my husband is, and having in-laws who are, Americans, Irish Americans. We are very close to my in-laws, even up to this time. And so he actually saw the values of his uncles, who are my husband's brothers, on how good fathers and how good husbands they are. And yes,
Mhm.
Ryan, no cheating. It's I met my husband here in Washington D.C. when I was in IMF. And yes, he was interested, but I said, no, I need to go back to the Philippines because I was sent by the Philippine government. So for 2 years, we were writing each other for 2 years until he proposed the marriage. But I tell you, the honesty is there. And so I really believed him. And so that's how we brought up the marriage and that's how we brought up the family. And yes, while he was in duty as a foreign service officer, most of the time he's out of the country. And the trust is there, the sincerity is there, no cheating. And I'm really so happy. That's why, maybe that's the reason why I never got married or never remarried, because it's just so perfect that I said, no, I don't think I can trust Filipino men. It's sort of like, it's one of those qualities that, yes, I've seen enough of my high school classmates, up to this age, who have several wives, in different parts of the world. And, I just share that with him. And therefore, the value is there. That's why I think he's a good father and he's a good, husband as well.
Yeah, you definitely would like to project that good role models in our babies' lives, and I feel so blessed to be surrounded by such good-hearted people, really just beautiful people inside and out. So I definitely feel you in terms of seeking those role models and projecting that to our kids.
Rochelle,
And
may I ask a question?
yes, yes.
Yeah. I mean, to Dr. Joyce and Teddy, in terms of just, as the dad in the group, I mean, I just have so much to learn. Any advice or thoughts on great Filipino fatherhood? What does that look like?
I can speak for my father because I really adore my father. Being a role model, and just like what I've said, talking and communicating with your children, showing the values of honesty, sincerity, and love, at the early age of the child's life. Continue, keep that until he grows up.
Mhm.
And just like, even if they're married, I mean, you're still their parent. Just like my son right now at 38 years old, mom, are you available this weekend? It's because I know that maybe he wants to give his daughter to me for the weekend. So continue that kind of behavior, that kind of relationship. And I tell you, it's a happy life.
Yeah.
It's a happy life.
So we do have 15 minutes left in our panel, which is incredible. I can't believe that we're almost finished with our panel of an hour and a half. But there's so much information that we're able to learn and teach each other. So Ryan had a great question for Teddy and Dr. Javier. Like, what does great Filipino fatherhood look like?
Dr. Joyce, you want to go first? Oh, you're
I'm
muted.
I'm think, you can go first. I'm thinking about it.
Okay. You know what, Ryan? You have to become and you have to raise a generation of Filipino men who really put effort into taking care of their mental health. We don't have a good model for how our Filipino men are able to process feelings, but they make an impact anyway. They wound you, they hurt you, and you tend to cope with them in a lot of these maladaptive ways. That's why you see so much toxic masculinity in the Filipino culture, because men were taught not to confront their feelings, men were taught to be macho, men were taught to hide their feelings from, the family, and to just bear the weight of the family problems all by himself. If you're a person who doesn't process what's going on inside, you have, eventually you'll pick a poison, like, and it doesn't have to necessarily be something super destructive like drugs or cheating, like sometimes it'll be like too much video games, or too much like gambling or gaming, like it'll manifest. The idea that you're running away from something will manifest in one way or another. And so if you want to break away from all of this toxic masculinity that we have in our culture, that we do truly have in our culture, you have to become the beginning of how Filipino men learn to be more in tune and more aware of what's going on inside, and to encourage that Filipino men, this barkada that you have of like new parents, of new dads, just like sharing with each other. Don't just talk about rashes, talk about how inadequate we all feel sometimes, or like how like today was just like your baby drove you out of your mind, like, or so like just having that giving yourself that avenue to ventilate and to process. It allows your feelings to digest, and you become less prone to coping in a maladaptive way.
Thank
And
you
Dr.
so
Abby.
much, Teddy. That was excellent. I think it just kind of shows how it's so important to have multidisciplinary like panels like this, just because I'm a pediatrician. Honestly,
Yeah.
they don't teach parenting to pediatricians, to be completely honest with you. So I'm just kind of blown away. But I think that right now we have parenting groups for like mothers of infants. So I would love like what Ryan is doing. It's amazing you have that ability to mobilize and get fathers together. That's such a gift. And so like, how do we move that forward? Like, but Teddy is so right. You have to start with yourself. You start with yourself and work through all that healing. But then now that you're kind of working through that healing, okay, now what are the skills that we need to learn? I guess that's kind of where our work comes in, just learn that there's no such thing as a perfect parent. Parenting is not a skill we're born with. We can still embrace what our parents passed on to us without sacrificing our culture, our identity. I think that's the beauty that I've learned. And using my scientific pediatrician hat, I look at like, I use a program that has been based on 30 years of research. So it's not reinventing the wheel. It's called Incredible Years. But anyway, the thing is that what I made sure is that it was congruent with Filipinos, like that I wasn't just putting a Western way of parenting onto our community. It was our community that said, this program is promising. And when we tried it out, they said, yes, this is a good program for our community. And so, yeah, I don't know, just keep coming to panels like this and keep being vulnerable and realize that, self-love is not selfish.
Oh, I love that.
Love that.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have about a little less than 20 minutes, maybe about 15 minutes. And I wanted to just also echo what everyone was saying so far in terms of like how to, what to say to future parents. And for me, what I've learned in the past couple months is that, don't be so hard on yourself. And I try to keep reminding myself, like, I am juggling 30 different things at the same time on top of trying to keep this little one alive. And I joke about it all the time, like, I have to keep him alive, but it's true. Like there's so many different responsibilities to juggle, and I really, have to remind myself to not be hard on myself. And also say yes to help. This is where I don't believe in the term hiya or shame of asking for help. I accepted all types of food and treats and offered to clean with much appreciation when I was dealing with like learning how to breastfeed, trying to figure out how to heal my body, and like constantly feeding and napping and all the pooping. It was just a lot to take in, and so I appreciated the opportunity to say yes for help. So in terms for my advice for future parents, don't be so hard on yourself and say yes. Um, so one of my last questions for the panel is, the title of the panel is called Raising an Influential Filipino Generation Meant to Disrupt. So with that title, what does that mean to you in terms of like, what do you hope for your children to disrupt? Who wants to start in terms of what do you hope for your kids?
To tell you honestly, Rachel, I don't understand the meant to disrupt. What do we mean? Like raising an influential Filipino generation meant to disrupt. What do we mean meant to disrupt?
Well, it's up to you in terms of how you interpret it. So, meant to disrupt is basically we're all in this this playing field, and do we want our kids to go out of the regular line of expectations of being a regular Filipino? What does it mean to go outside of the regular bubble of expectations? That's for me. That's how I interpret it.
I
If I
can go
may
first.
start,
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
raising an influential Filipino generation, I don't think teaching Filipino values, would disrupt the growth of my child and my grandchildren. There are a lot of good Filipino values that we can teach them, and I don't think it's a disruption at all.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, they are very good, at least based on my experience professionally, career wise. I went through it and I did not change. I did not change how I feel being a Filipino. I did not change. I can speak the language still perfectly. I did not, as a matter of fact, I was the first one who wrote the budget message in the Philippines in Filipino, and
Mm.
that was never written again when I was working with the Philippine government before I got married. And I carry that kind of trait, I carry that kind of value even up to this time. And I shared it with my son, I'm sharing it now with my grandchildren, and I don't think it's a disruption at all. It's
Okay.
just it's a matter of accepting, you know, uh the different cultures, understanding it and sharing it properly. At
And
least that's how I meant.
yeah, that's definitely. No, thank you for sharing, Wilna. And we have about 8 minutes left. I just want to make sure that we get through each of the speakers. In terms of the title, raising an influential Filipino generation meant to disrupt. Dr. Javier, what were you going to say?
Um, when I was asked to come to this panel with that title, I was like, heck yeah. So there's a lot that I want to say about that one. So growing up, I didn't think I could be a doctor because I never met a Filipina woman who was a mother who was a doctor. Like that's pretty
Wow.
much um I all my aunties were nurses, and so it wasn't until I met through Filipino Americans in Medicine at UC Irvine a woman who was a med student, and she was a mom, and she had kids, like I could actually like touch her, like you're real. So I think, I want my daughters to know like possibilities are open for what they want to be in this world, and um how I feel I've been able to be where I am to really kind of be a physician and a public health researcher to give back to the community that raised me. I'm so grateful to um, ethnic studies and learning about the Filipino American experience in the United States, and just kind of learning about our culture and learning to be proud to be Filipino. I think that's so important, and that's part of those childhood experiences I put in the chat, is that when we're proud of our ethnic identity, we call it cultural pride reinforcement, which is all what PhilPro's doing today. When they're proud, then they have better self-esteem, they have better outcomes. So that's what kind of resonated me with this title. And I mentioned I'm part of the Filipino Women's Network, and they write these books called the Disrupt series, and
Oh,
their
yeah.
goal is to have a Pinay woman in every sector be influential. And so when I went to a Filipino Women's Network conference for the first time, and everyone looked like me, where so many conferences I've been to, nobody looks like me. It was just so empowering, and the future is so open. And one of the people I met recently said, "Hey, what would happen if every Filipino woman in the world didn't go to work in the world? Like
Wow.
the world would stop." I'm just like, heck yeah. Like I just, just all the nurses that, anyway, I can go on and on, but I just there's so much that we need to disrupt, especially with COVID and how it's hurting our nurses, and we're so invisible still. But I can go on and on. So that's what that title meant to me, is that to make us not invisible, and help us bring light to what's happening to the Filipino American community in the US. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Teddy.
Okay, listen, this whole panel, we've been talking a good game. We've been really talking up how important communication is. And as parents, I want us to be really aware about how uncomfortable that's going to be for us in reality. You have to really take care of your mental health as a parent, because only when you have sufficient self-esteem, sufficient validation, in your life, that that your children talking back, asking questions, giving feedback does not feel like a threat to you. And the thing is, if we're going to train them to be disruptors out there in the world, we have to be aware the first thing they're going to disrupt is our family life. That they're gonna ask questions we're uncomfortable with. They're gonna have interests we never knew about. They're gonna, and we have to be okay with that, and we have to feel not threatened that they want something different than what we want for them, or that they want something different than what we wanted for ourselves.
Wow.
Or what we experienced. So when we're talking about disruption, be open to it in our own families, because that is how they will go out there in the world and disrupt it as well.
I love that, Teddy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Ryan, what about you? What does the title mean to you? What do you hope for your child?
Yeah, I felt like we could just end it there.
And then we're done.
Javier was like, wow. Like my heart is racing. It's at 12 o'clock at night here. But it's, yeah, well, I'll take it, because we're talking about internal, we're talking about communications. For me, another way of looking at this is about boldness, and this is about vision. And for me, I started thinking about, if we're really looking at the lens of disruption, I started off with saying about trauma, and about intergenerational trauma. The next part is intergenerational healing. Then the part after that is about intergenerational wealth. And so wealth, in like 100 or 500 years down the line, how can we be wealthy, not just financially, but be wealthy in terms of like love, right? And that takes like vision, and that takes like mindset. That means that it is so ingrained in our DNA to say, and genetically, that from one generation to another, it says, I am worthy of all the things that is possible. And so that's how I would see kind of how we think about disruption.
I love that. And I feel like even though you said that we should have ended after Teddy and Dr. Javier, that was a great way to end the panel, Ryan. I feel like that, it's really our job to help empower our kids, and that's through boldness. It's through through our own experience and through our own role modeling. So I completely appreciate all of your sentiments, your experiences. Wilna, Teddy, Dr. Javier, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us at PhilProCon 2021. I wanted to do a special shout out to Kit, who really brought us together, and of course to the whole PhilProCon team. Thank you, thank you, thank you for everyone who's joining us. Again, this is Rochelle Ocampo. I want to say thank you, and everyone take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.